All right, let's talk about variables. Now, the very simplest definition of a variable is any non-numeric symbol we use to stand in for a number. We will typically choose letters to name our variables. Now, there's one very important thing to remember about variables, and that is this. The same symbol always represents the same number, for as long as we're in the same context, as long as we're working on the same problem or the same scenario, or looking at the same expression. So, for example, when we see the expression x squared minus 2x plus 1, these two letter x's represent the same number. Now, why might we want to use a letter to stand in for the number? Well, maybe we don't know the number. And there are lots of reasons that we might not know the number. Maybe we don't know the number and we're trying to figure it out right now. Or maybe we don't know the number and we'll look it up later. We'll find out what it is using some method unrelated to the algebra we're writing right now. Or maybe we don't care what the number actually is. Maybe it's not going to affect our final result. Another possibility is that we are trying to make a statement about any number. Maybe the statement we're writing down is a general property of numbers. Or maybe we're trying to refer to just any old number that the statement is true about. The last reason we might want to let a letter stand in for a number is we're about to be writing it over and over again, and we don't want to keep writing our number. For example, maybe we're doing some complicated calculation involving the number 884,273,660,003, and we don't want to write that over and over again. So we let an x stand in for it until we're ready to actually get our final value. Now we have a rule that the same letter, the same symbol, always represents the same value. If we want to represent more than one value, we are allowed to use more than one symbol. Now, there are actually not as many letters of the alphabet as we might like to use for symbols. Right? There are only 26 letters. Sometimes we have more than 26 numbers that we want to represent. So there are some rules about what constitutes a different variable. Capital letters and lowercase letters are different. Now, that can be a problem because some letters look the same, capital or lowercase. For example, capital and lowercase s, capital and lowercase x, capital and lowercase c. If you expect to possibly be using both of them, it's important to make them look different. The most common recommendation is to write the lowercase letters like these in cursive. So capital S, little s, capital C, little c. Because the cursive x is so awkward to write, and we use the variable x so often, x is typically an exception. So we'll write capital X with bars on it, and then little x just like little x. As a side note, make sure that in your handwriting, lowercase x and lowercase y look different from one another. It doesn't work well to do it on the screen, but I typically write lowercase x like that, as two curves coming together, because it prevents it from looking even potentially like a lowercase y. Okay, so even with capital and lowercase letters, though, that limits us to 26 plus 26 is 52. Sometimes even that's not enough, in which case we use what are called subscripts. These are just small letters or numbers written below the line of text. For example, if we want two variables named little v, we could have little v sub f and little v sub 0. A few things to be aware of. Make sure, in addition to making sure that x and y look different from each other, make sure your variables look different from numbers. So, for example, if you have a variable named capital I or lowercase l, make sure those look different from 1. If you have a variable named capital O or lowercase o, make sure those look different from 0. Make sure the letter Z looks different from 2. For some of these letters, this is going to have to involve practicing a modification to your handwriting. It doesn't really matter what practice you choose, but it's something to pay attention to. Okay, so now that we know what variables are, what's a variable expression? Well, that's simple enough. A variable expression is just an expression containing one or more variables. A couple of notes. If variables are present, use a dot to represent multiplication instead of the little x, which looks a lot like the letter x, which is why we don't do it. When we just write a number next to a variable, that means multiply. So for example, if we write 3x, that means 3 times x. So some examples of variable expressions. So we could have just a variable by itself. That's a variable expression. We could have an expression that describes doing a bunch of arithmetic to a variable. We could have an expression that involves doing a bunch of arithmetic that happens to include a variable. We can have one variable, or we can have several variables. We can write a variable anywhere that we could write a number. The only rule is that if we replaced all the variables with numbers, we would be able to actually do the arithmetic.